Well, good morning, everyone. Good chilly morning, and thank you all for being here this morning for the rollout of this really important report. First of all, I want to thank Kim Bimsteffer, Executive Director of our Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, for her work and the great work of the staff in her department on not only this report, but on implementing our ambitious agenda to save people money on healthcare. I also want to thank Representative Lujan, the chair of the House Health and Insurance Committee. Thank you for being here today to share a few words with us, and I also want to thank some of the elected officials who have joined us here today. We have Senator Rhonda Fields, Senator Joanne Janal, Representative Dominique Jackson, and Senator Kevin Priola. And it's my understanding that Senator Brittany Pedersen is on her way. So we want to thank them for being here today and for their work making healthcare and prescription drugs more affordable in Colorado. So thank you all. And I want to thank Claudia Curry-Hill for sharing her story. It's always brave to share your story, and I thank you for being willing to do it for us. To raise awareness about the real human toll of the high cost of prescription drugs. It's really important that we realize that behind the statistics, which you see here today, and the charts and the technical policy language, that there are real people whose lives are impacted by the choices we make in this building. Real people living in our communities who go without health care because they can't afford it. This isn't a hypothetical. It's true for 1 in 5 Coloradoans. So think of the 5 people that you love most in your life. Now consider that one of them would go without care because they couldn't get it. They might get even sicker, or worst of all, they might die because they can't afford it. And that's not how it should be. People who do have health insurance are still terrified that the out-of-pocket costs from a serious illness will send them into a financial tailspin. People who are forced to walk away from the pharmacy counter when they can't afford the sky-high prices of prescription drugs. And I heard that in testimony when I carried legislation years ago. People would say, I'm just going to have to walk away and die because I can't afford my prescription. In some extreme cases, people are forced to make the agonizing choice between purchasing the medicine they need to survive and putting food on their table or keeping a roof over their heads or their families' heads. I know it because I used to be one of those people. I was a statistic too. So by now I think you're all really familiar with my story, and I still consider myself really lucky, not only because I've survived several cancer diagnoses, and not only because I was able to participate in a clinical trial for free that saved my life, but that I didn't go broke in the process. And it was still difficult to hold down a job, feed my daughters, stay in our home, and keep up with medical bills while trying to regain my health. We know that 2/3 of bankruptcies are due to medical issues, and countless Coloradoans struggle with the high cost of health care in our state, laying awake at night, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst. So it's our job as policymakers to deliver relief for these Coloradans. And so this past session, we set out to implement a bold agenda to reduce health care costs for hardworking families across our state. In partnership with our great legislature, we enacted landmark hospital transparency reforms. We tackled surprise out-of-network billing. And most importantly of all, we reduced premiums on the individual health insurance market by 20% statewide, and even more in our rural communities, where healthcare premiums have been particularly outrageous. We also took action on prescription medicine. Americans often pay 3 or 5 times what our neighbors to the north pay for the same medication. Many of these drugs are manufactured in the same factories, on our side of the border no less, but sold at an outrageous markup to the American consumer. So with the leadership of Senators Janal and Rodriguez and Representative Hawkes Lewis, we passed legislation setting up a plan to import prescription drugs from Canada. And we are currently working with the administration in Washington for approval to implement that plan. And thanks to Representative Roberts and Senators Donovan and Priola, We also passed legislation to curb the soaring cost of insulin. There's also a drug pricing bill before Congress. We're optimistic it will pass in the House of Representatives as a first step this week. But we know that we can't wait on Washington to deliver relief from high prescription drug costs. In fact, federal estimates say that U.S. spending on prescription drugs will grow by 60% over the next 8 years. And we have families in our state right now who are struggling. This is not some abstract issue. These are not just statistics. This impacts human beings every day. A poll that came out just last week showed that 82% of Coloradoans, an overwhelming majority, believe that the cost of prescription drugs and medication is too high, and 9 out of 10 want us to take action at the state level. And last month, a poll showed that 68% of Coloradoans and 81% of Colorado seniors view the issue of high prescription drug costs as, quote, very important, end quote. Perhaps most telling of all, 71% of Coloradoans say that pharmaceutical companies are the most responsible for rising prescription drug prices. So I want to emphasize that I always say that I wouldn't be alive today without pharma. So if it wasn't for pharma, I wouldn't be here, and I appreciate what they do. But there needs to be a balance. When drug companies are making record profits while hardworking people go without the medicine they need to live, the system is clearly broken. So today's roadmap is an important roadmap that will show how we can fix it. I know I said before that I consider myself lucky, but this shouldn't be about luck. Health is too important. People in our state, they're not looking for a handout. They're just looking for some basic fairness. In the words of former New York Governor Mario Cuomo, all they're asking is to be protected in those moments when they would not be able to protect themselves. And as someone who has walked mile after mile in those shoes and spent my life with my shoulder against the wheel trying to improve the system, I know that we have no time to waste. With that, I want to turn it over to Representative Susan Lontine, who's going to say a few words about why prescription drugs are a priority for the legislature this year.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Primavera, and good morning to you all. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about the report, and I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for sharing her story, and to use those stories so that we can make good policy recommendations that can help our citizens of Colorado. And that's why we're all here. We believe that you shouldn't go broke because you get sick. It's as simple as that. And right now it happens all too often. And I hear these stories all the time. I hear them when I go knock doors in my district. I hear them when I go to the grocery store to go shopping. I hear them in testimony in committee. Just this last session, we heard those stories of people who can't afford their medicine and go without, and often to the detriment of their health. And that is wrong. We in the legislature are trying to do something about it, and this upcoming session you can expect to see numerous bills from legislative leaders to do just that. And I want to thank Senators Field, Janal, Priola, and Representative Jackson for being here today to help us introduce this report. A report that lays out a series of both state and federal policy proposals for lawmakers to consider. And they're so good, we are already working on some of them. We need to have this conversation about solutions, and then we need to take that conversation and put it into action. So thank you to the Lieutenant Governor and to Executive Director Bimsteffer for building on this important conversation. And you have this legislature's commitment to work towards real solutions to save people money on their prescription drug bills this year. And our next speaker that we have is Director Bimsteffer. So, oh, there you are.
Thank you, Representative. And I want to thank the Governor and the Lieutenant Governor, our legislative partners, for your focus on affordability of health care. Health care is the #1 concern among hardworking Coloradans and their employers. The cost burden of prescriptions is not just taking a toll on the financial well-being of Coloradans, it also has a tragic effect of people foregoing their care, especially medications, because they can't afford them. For these reasons, saving people money on health care is a top priority for the administration. We appreciate the efforts of this past session to address affordability issues, which was largely focused on hospital. And that's logical because hospitals represent about 50% of the cost of an individual's premium. They represent about 40% of cost for employers. But as part of the overall affordability agenda, we're also focused on another incredibly important area of healthcare, and that is our prescription drugs. Prescription drugs are the first line of offense and defense for almost every illness, chronic conditions, and injuries. They also represent about 20 to 25% of an employer's spend. Over the next decade, the federal government projects that spending for prescription drugs will be the fastest growing component of healthcare costs, with cost trends that will consistently outpace all other aspects of our healthcare system and spending. For these reasons, the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing is releasing a report intended to inform meaningful dialogue about how we might work together to better control the rising cost of healthcare specific to prescription drugs, to the benefit of all Coloradans, their employers, and public programs that are paid for through taxpayer dollars, like our program in Medicaid. I want to thank all who contributed to this report, and the list is lengthy. We had providers, consumer groups, insurance companies, unions and their trusts, employers, consultants, and I want to thank profusely the staff at HCPF. Healthcare Policy and Financing pays about $1 billion in prescription drugs every year. I don't know that anybody else in the state has a higher prescription drug expense. So it is deeply meaningful to us because we also want to make sure that we can afford to provide the best care to our state's most vulnerable. This report has been produced by Colorado and for Colorado. It provides an overview of the various drivers of rising costs, as well as potential state and federal means of policy and best practices that we can employ to address those rising healthcare costs. Some of the cost drivers that you'll find in the report are patent protections, patent protection policies that allow manufacturers to extend for a tremendous number of years, decades in fact, protections for the highest cost drugs, during which time there is no competitor that would help bring down those costs. During which time today we don't have transparency into what is causing the cost of these drugs. Is it the research? Is it marketing? Is it payment to middlemen? We don't have any transparency into that. That becomes a perfect storm when it's combined with the fact that the FDA doesn't have any authority over pricing, nor can Medicare negotiate drugs, and at the same time we have an unprecedented investment in specialty drugs that are coming out at prices of which we have never seen before. That, my friends, is the definition of a perfect storm. And it is amplified by lobbying efforts that have protected those circumstances, which then will fuel, going forward, the federal government's projection of the highest costs going forward, being prescription drugs. The report will also discuss payments between manufacturers of prescription drugs to insurance companies that are wholly owned PBMs in the total of $160 billion. In a perfect world, we would have full transparency into those dollars and their impact, and in a perfect world, they would pass right through our insurance companies' hands into downward pressure and downward offsets of the cost of policies paid for by individuals or employers. The unfortunate truth is a lot of it gets stuck in the middle and is represented by the highest profits in the industry, which are often contributed in our insurance companies because of the markups around prescription drugs. The report addresses those things, but it also invites employers to bond together to negotiate better deals with those insurance companies and PBMs and outlines some of the best practices and best prices so that our employers have a place to aim. We also analyze direct-to-consumer advertising, which some of us, we feel like if we watched a commercial, maybe we could just skip across the meadow in our hardest times in life if we just took that drug. The unfortunate part is an unprecedented amount is going into marketing, far outweighing the cost that's actually going into research and development for the new therapies. So there's opportunity on all sides of that. Some of the solutions that the report will outline is prescription drug transparency, so we have insights into both what is driving the cost of the drugs, as well as how much these drugs are increasing in cost for those that are common and all too popular and frequent in our utilization. The report calls for better payment transparency, and the pass along of all those rebates and payments between manufacturers and our insurance companies. That Colorado receives their share of the $160 billion, and then it goes to the benefit of consumers and employers. It underscores the importance of importation of bringing drugs through Canada and continuing that good work, which our department has undertaken at the direction of the legislature, but it also invites to open up other countries safely and appropriately, so we continue to get affordability through other countries. It invites us to consider the establishment of an affordability board that might study, going forward, all the things that we can do together to continue to drive down the cost of prescriptions to the benefit of all Coloradans. And it introduces new tools and innovations coming out, breathtaking innovations that will come out from our own entrepreneurs in Colorado that can change the trajectory of the tools that we put in our physicians' hands so we can not only make better decisions around costs, but improve the health of the patients and allow physicians to prescribe not just pills, but programs that get at the root of disease. These are game changers that will come out of our great state of Colorado, innovations that we will look back on with pride as they roll out around the rest of the country. All these many innovations, these highlights into what is driving the costs and solutions at the state and the federal level, we invite you to engage with the objective of helping us control costs for programs like Medicaid for all Coloradans and for our employers. The report's available on our website at colorado.gov/HCPF, HCPF. So dive in. This is your formal invitation, open invitation to be with us and to be part of the solution. Healthcare Policy and Financing, the Office of Saving People Money, and the Division of Insurance will hold a series of collaborative discussions with stakeholders and our elected officials to help prioritize and sequence the implementation of strategies that will lower prescription drug costs, thereby making care more affordable and addressing what we hold so dear, which is making sure that our Coloradans can get the care that they need and that they deserve, the best care in the country. And with that, I want to turn it over to the star of the day, what our whole day is all about, and that's Claudia, to tell your story.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. For everything. Good morning. I'm Claudia Curry-Hill, and I actually am an activist for the MS Society. And I was diagnosed with primary progressive MS in 1988, and at that time there were no drugs available. So you can imagine my delight and surprise when in 1993 they finally came up with some MS drugs. So they were the first disease-modifying drugs. That particular drug didn't work for me, but later on I went on Tysabri. It was a monthly infusion which really kept my MS in check. My husband worked for the federal government, and we had great insurance, which covered the $60,000 a year cost. My copay was $50 a month at that time. Tysabri now costs just over $83,000 a year. I discontinued Tysabri after testing positive for PML, which means I could have gotten a brain infection. And I went on a drug named Gilenya at a cost of $63,000 per year. My copays were $200 per month. The cost per year for Gilenya is currently just under $100,000. I was also on Ampera, which enabled me to stand longer and walk better, and it was a great drug. My copays for that drug was also $200 a month. Sometimes I would be able to walk a long time and stand longer. So at that point, my copays were almost $500 a month, which was fine because my husband was still working. When he retired, and he worked longer than he would have, he retired at 73, and I found out that my drug copays could go anywhere between $700 to $3,000 a month. As retirees on a fixed income, there was no way our budget could take those monthly copays. Therefore, hoping for the best, I made the difficult decision to stop taking my MS drug. When I went in for my annual MRI, I showed that new lesions on my brain and spinal cord, and I had lost most of the use of my left leg. My MS had progressed without the drugs I was able to take for so many years. We need more answers as to why MS drugs are consistently increasing in price. I do not want anyone else living with MS or any other chronic disease to make the impossible choice to forego their life-changing medication because of cost like I had to do. No one should have to choose between taking the medication they need and draining their savings. Wishing, hoping, and praying is not a good alternative to having access to affordable, life-altering, and life-saving medications. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Claudia for sharing her story. That's sometimes difficult to do. We did also have Senator Brittany Pedersen join us. You were on your way, I think, when I talked before. And then Representative Jonathan Singer has joined us as well. So I think per the comms team, we have time for about 2 or 3 questions. So are there any questions? All right, thank you.